This is John Howell Essential Cuts, your daily rundown of the best from today's show on 890 WLS.
Reading from my next guest piece, which I read at CATO.org, CATO.org, recognizing that Ukraine might not win its war with Russia is the first step to formulating a better approach for America. Let's welcome Doug Bandow back from overseas, a senior fellow at the CATO Institute. He specialized in foreign policy and civil liberties, worked in the Reagan administration. Doug, welcome back to the program. How are you, sir?
Happy to be on. Yeah, doing well.
Please explain why we should do a little rethink on our foreign policy in regards to Ukraine specifically.
Well, I think it's very important for us to be realistic. That is, it makes sense to wish Ukraine well. I think it makes sense to help support them, ensure their independence. But we shouldn't have illusions here. And there are an awful lot of people talking as if, they're about to have a major breakthrough. They're going to take Crimea, the Donbass, et cetera. And I don't see that happening. So far, we don't see the military results. We've got to ask the question, well, what if they don't? I mean, they have a much smaller population. Their economy, has crashed because of the invasion. They face extraordinary pressures internally. If I had a bet on which country, might face potential collapse first, I'm not sure it's the Russians.
Let me read one of the last paragraphs in your piece, a good jumping off point. Washington's failing to attempt to use Ukraine to wreck Russia should spur a broad rethink of America's destructive foreign policy. U.S. sanctimony is world-class, with successive administrations wailing about democracy and aggression while invading Iraq based on a lie and arming Saudi Arabia in its unprovoked attack on Yemen. Okay, that's quite incendiary, but it's also pretty accurate, isn't it?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, look, there's a lot of good the United States has done, but we also have to recognize that in cases like, say, Saudi Arabia or, frankly, the Iraq invasion, we did a heck of a lot of bad. My reaction is let's be realistic and acknowledge our shortcomings. We're going to have more credibility that way. I get very frustrated when I listen to American policymakers act as if they're Vestal virgins, because the rest of the world knows we aren't. And we complain that the global South isn't supporting us. Why doesn't India come all in on our behalf? Well, it's issues like that. They've seen us in action.
So we have an interest in helping preserve Ukrainians' independence, but maybe not every inch of the previous border.
Exactly. I mean, I want Ukraine to survive as an independent nation. I want them to be sovereign. I want them to have options in terms of how they organize themselves politically and economically. But that doesn't mean that we should go all in, for example, to try to ensure that they can take back Crimea. It's not clear to me that they're ever going to have that capability. And if they seem to do so, that may be the sort of thing that causes the Russians to escalate. We have to ask what's in America's interest, not just what they want.
You think there's people in the administration, or at least in the in D.C., they want to impose a reverse Monroe Doctrine right up to the Russian border?
Well, that's right. I mean, if you look at U.S. policy, and it's kind of attractive if you're an American, we want to be able to control events up to China's border in East Asia. We want to control events up to Russia's border. We want to control events up to kind of fill in the blank. Well, we would hate that if they tried to do that to us. And we need to understand that these may not be nations we like, but there are a lot of nationalists there who are responding not ideologically. Frankly, they're responding the way we would if the Chinese were trying to carry on in the Caribbean, on the eastern seaboard, or the Russians were doing the same.
Is this what Kissinger used to call realpolitik?
Yeah, and you can also call it kind of strategic empathy. That is, you want to understand what the other folks think. We believe we're doing good. We believe they shouldn't be fearful. But the reality is, if they are, they're going to react that way. We need to care about what the reality is, not what we wish things to be. And I think realpolitik requires a pretty hard-nosed assessment of what the world's really like.
Doug Bandow is here, senior fellow at the CATO Institute. He specialized in foreign policy, worked in the Reagan administration. You wrote of unnamed U.S. officials complaining that the Ukrainian authorities are just too caring for their soldiers' lives, and they're unwilling to push mass attacks through minefields and what have you, and that's why this offensive has stalled. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there have been some very interesting articles appearing in New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and they all cite, unnamed officials. It always gets frustrating, but of course, people hate to actually have their name out there when they're saying things like that. But they all come across in terms of the frustration that Ukrainian officials actually care about their soldiers and don't want to have them all slaughtered. And, look, I mean, Ukraine wants to survive not only as a nation, but it wants its people to survive. That's part of your nation surviving. And mass attacks through minefields, hit by artillery where the Russians have air superiority, that has not been a winning tactic. The American advisors apparently think it should be, but even if they break a line that way, if they've lost so heavily, how do they kind of take advantage of that breakthrough? And Ukraine has suffered terribly in this war. The number of dead and wounded. I mean, this is a horrendous toll that they paid.
It's like Grant and Pershing and even old Blood and Guts in World War II into the breach.
No, that's right. That there's a point where attrition may be the way you win, but the Ukrainians don't have more people. I mean, they aren't the Union versus the Confederacy. If they're anything, they're the Confederacy. Mm-hmm. That is, they have a much smaller population. They have to husband their resources. They have to make sure they're not squandering lives.
So right now, the Ukrainian government is surviving only on Western handouts? Basically.
I mean, look, their economy has been ravaged. To the west and where it's not occupied, there is functioning economy, but, you don't have Western investment going in. Most of the resources are having to go in terms of weapons production. They have welfare needs of people who've been displaced. 10 million people have fled the country. They're not there contributing. I mean, they make their budget because of Western support.
How can we save them without abandoning them?
Well, I think what we've got to do is kind of sit down, and the U.S. and the Allies have to decide kind of what they are prepared to fund and provide weapons for, and then go to the Ukrainians and say, look, you can make any decision you want, but here's what we are willing to do. Here is what we are willing to do to try to preserve your independence and sovereignty, and then talk about some kind of a negotiated strategy of trying to come up with how do we end this, whether it be I hope it would be nice to have a negotiated agreement or at least a ceasefire. How do we come up with a mechanism where Russia and Ukraine can live with imperfect results, where nobody's happy, but Ukraine survives even if it's lost something as part of this war?
Kind of switching gears a bit, what does the way in which Prigozhin was killed suggest to you?
Well, everyone's suspicious that it's Putin, and I think that's quite fair to presume that. We don't know for sure. I mean, Prigozhin probably had other enemies. At the very least, people in the military didn't like him. I mean, he was clearly, it's not so clear he wanted to overthrow Putin, but it was quite clear he was going after military types and wanted some of the military leadership out of office. So there conceivably are a lot of people who might have wanted him dead. I mean, I'm amazed that he was prepared to fly to Moscow. That, to me, given his situation, I would have stayed away from Russian airspace.
Yeah. Supposedly he was in Africa 2 days before he was vaporized, and I thought he was in Belarus at the very worst.
No, so and his activities in Africa have tended to benefit the Russian state. So it's certainly possible that he had a reasonable relationship going on with Putin and somebody else decided to off him. Nevertheless, when you're the guy at the top and you've been disrespected and some guy's done what Prigozhin did, not only kind of a mutiny but also criticizing the war, it does help, kind of concentrate the mind when the guy goes down and everybody thinks the big guy took care of it. Nobody wants wants to take on the big guy.
Is he the first caterer in history to get blown out of the sky? In your memory?
Boy, I mean, there have been a lot of folks. I mean, you look around the world. Former President Zia of Pakistan was one who got. I mean, so we've seen we've seen others who've been taken. It's like the vice president, I think, of South Sudan or what have you. I think he's probably the most important, because he's coming from a very serious country, major military position, in a nuclear armed power. That gives him significance that a lot of these other kinds of things wouldn't.
Doug, welcome back to the States. When's the next time you have to travel internationally?
Actually, next week. Going to Malaysia.
Do you have all your shots?
I sure do. I do that all the time. That's one thing. That's a precaution I take.
Smart man. Doug Bandow, always nice talking to you. We'll catch up maybe a month from now.
Sounds good. Good to talk to you.
Take care. Doug Bandow, senior fellow at the CATO Institute, has a nice parking place over there. He specialized in foreign policy and civil liberties, worked in the Reagan administration. You could read more at cato.org.
You're listening to John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
Reading from your Chicago Tribune. My next guest penned this. Robert Borgstrom spent most of his life on the Chicago River as the owner and one of the captains of the Wendella sightseeing line. As he said, 50, 60 years ago, this was an ugly, filthy river. And 20 years ago, it wasn't much better. I would sometimes find dead bodies floating around. But look, now the river's clean and the banks are alive with trees, small parks, and restaurants. That's all helped me appreciate Chicago even more. Close quote. As the old man used to say, Richard J., we hope to have fish in the river.
And in the river, we hope to have fish. And many of your employees at noontime can go down and fish, have a barbecue. I really mean it. Have a barbecue, and they can barbecue their fish, a cold bottle of beer or something, and really enjoy themselves.
Rick Kogan is columnist for the Chicago Tribune, member of the Chicago Journalism Hall of Fame. He finds the stories that others don't see. Also terrific at remembering Chicago legends. Rick, welcome back. Tell us about Robert Borgstrom.
Well, one of a kind, Bob Borgstrom. He was born on the north side. By the time his father, Bo Albert Borgstrom, started running a boat out of Navy Pier in 1934-35, giving rides to people for a quarter. And then eventually, in 1939, he moved the boat over to where the Wendella still operates from, right at the foot of the Wrigley Building in the river. And Bob started working. They did some war stuff during the war, but after the war, when Bob was a young teenager, he would stand on Michigan Avenue and just try to induce passersby to take a boat ride, which was so exotic then at the time, John. It's not like it is now where, especially you can see out your windows from where you're working. You see these thousands of people riding dozens of boats all the time. It was very competitive. There was another liner in town, and there were nothing but fights between the kids who worked for it. One day, Bob told this story. Oh, seriously, Bob told the story how he was tied to a flagpole and beaten by the crew of another ship. It was very, very rough and tumble. It was not the beautiful and incredibly lucrative tourism business it is today, but Bob's responsible for that, too. Wendella now has 5 tour boats and 5 water taxis, and there's Skyliner, and there's, stand on the Michigan Avenue Bridge, and in 20 minutes you'll see a dozen boats. Yeah. He was a character. He's sort of hard shell on the outside, and that of course that would happen when you get the crap knocked out of you by other sailors on the river. But you don't think of Chicago, and especially a place like the Wrigley Building is a place where people are fighting.
It happens every place. This is my portion of the river. You're not here. It sounds like something out of The Sopranos. Do you believe the quote that he used to find dead bodies?
Well, I know it for sure. He showed me a couple in the early days. It was, when he said 20 years ago, that would have been, before the turn of the century. And what would happen, the statute of limitations being long over, Bob would go, God, Rick, damn it. Bob would almost always have breakfast at the Billy Goat, sit there with his great friend, Sam Cyanis. Bob Borgstrom was the first customer inside the Billy Goat when it opened on Hubbard Street. And he and Sam Cyanis were like brothers. They had breakfast every morning. And then Bob would walk over to the dock, which was a block south, and sometimes he'd come back and he'd go, Sam, Rick, come see what I found here. And we'd walk over there, and there'd be a body floating between the boat and the dock. And he'd take, I don't know the terminology, John, of boating, but he'd take one of these long poles that he had on the boat.
A hook on the end of it.
And it would just shove the body down toward the loading dock of the Sun-Times, a block to the west. And I go, why are you doing that, Bob? He goes, well, what can I do? He goes, Rick, I can't help the guy. And if I call the police, I won't be able to take the boat out.
Yeah, I don't want my fingerprints on this. I don't want to be part of the story. I don't want to be part of the police report. It'll slow me down.
That's a sensible Bob Borgstrom. I saw him do it at least twice, John, and I'm sure he did it many, many, many more
Just
times.
Let the Sun-Times guys worry about it. Just shove it down that way.
Yeah, exactly. It's their problem. It's their problem. They're always open.
Did he come up with the world's most beautiful skyline as the moniker?
No, I think that was his dad. I think that was his dad in the 30s. I think that became their slogan early on, and the mystery of the name too is what does Wendella mean? Nobody knows. We think, and Bob thinks, that it was some girl that his father may have known, and called it Wendella. If first it was with only one L. Then he changed it for some reason to have two L's. And I'll tell you another story. When Bob and his two sons, his great son, I think you know Mike Borgstrom, who's now the president of the company, and his brother Steve, who helped run the company for a long time, they were at Arlington Park one day, and all of a sudden, they're looking at the sheet, and all of a sudden they see a horse named Wendella. Mm-hmm. And they track down the owner and say, and threaten to sue him because you can't use our name. That name has never been used anywhere else on the planet. And I always loved that story too. But he was really something. He made it to almost 90, and I'll tell you, he was a regular in the Wise Guys corner at the Billy Goat. And he looked like that.
Do the editors at the Tribune assign you these when guys pass away, or do you find these yourself and then say, "Look, I want to write a piece on this man because he's a unique Chicago guy"?
No, in this case, I've known Bob for probably 50 years. I've known Bob since my 20s. Yeah. And I had heard that he had been ill. I had dinner with him about a year ago out in Glenview where he lived. And I heard that he died. And in cases like that, when that happens, I will write into the editors and say, "Hey, Bob Borgstrom died." A lot of the time, and it's kind of sad, they'll say, "Well, who's that?" I'll say, Captain Wendella, blah, blah, blah. But other times, it's even worse. Bob kept a low profile. If Bob had any self-promotional genes, he would have been incredibly, incredibly famous, but he did not like to promote himself. Mike, his son, is much better at that and is really a good guy about that. But Bob was not that kind of toot his own horn. He worked too hard, too, part of it. He worked too hard. And, so I'll pitch the story, and generally they will say, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea for an obituary." And I'll go, "Okay, thanks a million." Because in this case, they didn't put any regular paid obituaries in any other papers. And I, in a sense, it's not a scoop, but I was the only one who knew about it.
I think, it takes a certain art to write a great memoir or an obituary, if you will. I think you and Pete Hamill are two of the best at that.
Thanks. Well, that's pretty good company for you to put me in, Pete Hamill.
How is Sam Cianis? I've been in there a few times. I've not seen him recently. Of course, I go there after 7 o'clock at night.
Yeah, he's not working as much as he used to. For decades. For decades, Sam, you find Sam, the owner of the Billy Goat Empire, you'd find him in there at 6:30 in the morning cleaning the grills, for goodness sake. But he's not, Sam's in his late 80s. He and Bob, I think, Bob died at 89, a few weeks shy of his 90th birthday. And he and Sam, they may share the same year of birth. So Sam is in his late 80s. He'll come down there sometimes on Sunday with his kids and their kids and hang around for a little while, but it's not like the old days when he used to have to, throw people out of there. But he's in pretty good shape.
He's always been in great shape. Always been in great shape. Well, Mr. Kogan, thank you very much for popping in. I thought it was a great piece. Again, you really have a nice touch when it comes to that. And
thanks, John.
I hope you're doing well, and I'll talk to you again soon.
You bet. Sooner the better. Thanks,
Take care.
John.
Rick Kogan from your Chicago Tribune there. One of the best in the business about finding stories that others don't even see. Terrific at remembering Chicago legends.
This is John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
It is a familiar phone scam, once again making the rounds in Kane County specifically. Easy one to fall for. If you receive a call from the Kane County Sheriff's Office and they're requesting payment for a supposed outstanding warrant or ticket, some sort of legal matter, and they're calling directly from the Sheriff's Department, guess what? It's a scam. Let's start there with a man we check in with at least a couple times a month, Steve Bernas, President and CEO of the Better Business Bureau of Chicago and Northern Illinois. This one comes around at least once a year, doesn't it, Steve?
It seems to be coming more than once a year, John. Thank you so much for having me tonight. These imposter scams are growing in intensity and creativity at the Better Business Bureau. So what I mean by that is they're trying to scare you into paying something or giving information up because it's a law enforcement officer. And if you don't do that, something's going to happen to you. You're going to go to jail or you're going to get deported if you're if not a citizen, and hurting your job with your boss and things of that nature, kind of put the fear into you to respond in some way. And as we talked about many times, John, the caller ID is a pretty inexpensive, easy way to manipulate it. So you can have it say, Naperville Police Department or Kane County Sheriff, and it's not them, it's somebody else using their name, unfortunately, John. And
this is happening in Lincolnwood, too, kind of the same scam, different variety?
Yeah, we received word from the village of Lincolnwood as well, basically, that they're warning residents and businesses there's an ongoing, phone scams where basically they're using the names of real officers. So sometimes the people know that the officers' names, so they're using that to their advantage to coerce victims and giving money and information like their Social Security number. And unfortunately, what happens when you give a Social Security number, John, is they can take your advantage of your ID or steal your ID in some way, and they can do it a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. You can't get it back. So once you give that valuable information or pay the fine allegedly, with cash, credit cards, gift cards, whatever it may be, there's no way of getting it back unless you use your credit card.
I talk regularly with a buddy of mine who's on the program. He's a mortgage broker, and he's always talking about how to repair your credit, as far as, debt relief and, pay down your credit cards. He's legit, but I understand that you guys have done a major investigation that a lot of these credit repair companies will put you further into debt.
They will, John. Unfortunately, we just did, like you said, a major investigation in North America, and our files show that we received over 11,000 complaints and negative reviews about debt and credit assistance companies. Like you said, there are some great companies out there, but there's, of course, always every industry bad actors who ruin it for everybody else. And what we looked at is the types of complaints we received on those types of companies, the bad actors. And basically what it comes down to be that they're reporting that they get these high promises, that they can erase bad debts or erase your bad credit reports for no reason at all, and nobody can do that. You have to have a verifiable reason in order for the credit reporting companies to take that information. And usually companies are not going to erase your bad debt because they like you or you call them. You know that as well, John. So we're seeing a pattern of high fees where people are charged high fees by these companies and who said they're going to work with their creditors. And, John, like you said, they end up spending more money, unfortunately, that they could have saved and paid the creditors. So it's best to, as we talked about, John, before, call the creditors. Call them directly. Don't avoid their phone calls. And they want to work with you because it's money that's owed to them.
So our actionable items today, Steve: refuse to work with companies that won't tell you your rights regarding credit repair or debt relief, and always be very, very hesitant of anybody claiming to be associated with a government agency or police agency on the phone.
Exactly. And the promises, be careful of promises who can erase bad debt or clean up everything easily. There's no easy fix. You got to work at it. It could take years. But the imposter scams are really alarming, John. We're seeing that from all these different, areas of law enforcement, Kane County, and now the village of Lincolnwood just alerted us as well. So we want consumers to be wary of it. Tell your friends and family. And make sure that the only way to put scammers out of business is not to give them your business, because there's nothing we can help you with after you give them the money.
Yeah, and remember, a fool and his or her money quickly separated. Due diligence. Be careful of what you decide to do with your cash. Steve, thank you very much for your time as always. We appreciate it. We'll check out more at bbb.org, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Thank you so much, John. Have a great night.
Take care.
You're listening to John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
Alex Isenstadt is a terrific writer for Politico.com. He covers a lot of territory there. And his most recent article, as I mentioned before the break, is the fact that Donald Trump's, this is my conjecture here, not Alex's, Donald Trump's campaign is not going to be interrupted by all the trials. Donald Trump's campaign is, in fact, the trials. And reading from Alex's piece here from Politico.com, in the last, 3 weeks or so, he has raised $20 million as he's parlayed his 4 indictments into campaign cash. Alex, welcome back. Before we talk here, let's just remind our listeners that Trump is no stranger to making a pitch.
These cards feature some of the really incredible artwork pertaining to my life and my career. It's been very exciting. You can collect your Trump digital cards just like a baseball card, or other collectibles. Here's one of the best parts. Each card comes with an automatic chance to win amazing prizes like dinner with me. I don't know if that's an amazing prize, but it's what we have. Or golf with you and a group of your friends at one of my beautiful golf courses, and they are beautiful.
You get the idea. The former president raised $4.18 million last Friday alone, the single highest 24-hour period of his campaign to date, because the day before we all watched the theatrics in Atlanta. Alex, welcome back to Double the Us, sir. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Any surprise that he's raised this kind of money?
No, it's really not. And you know, he's really done a great job over the years of figuring out a way to tap into the grievances of his supporters to raise lots and lots of small dollar contributions. And if you think about it, what happened last week in terms of the mugshot that was taken when he was booked at that Atlanta jail, it really offered him a golden opportunity to raise a lot of money. Why? Because his campaign was able to take that mugshot and slap it onto a bunch of merch, right? You could get T-shirts, you could get short-sleeve T-shirts, long-sleeve T-shirts, coffee mugs, and it gave people something to buy, something to have, right? And so they were able to sell a lot of merch and raise a lot of money by doing that.
Have you ever done an analysis, Alex, of the donors themselves? Obviously, Donald Trump is not a favor of the quote-unquote Republican donor class. A lot of them have made other choices this time around, for better or worse. But most of his donations come from what's considered to be small donors, correct?
That's right. These are mom and pop types. These are, these are not the big billion-dollar donors. Those elites in the donor class have largely favored other candidates in this race and have long sort of spurned Trump, right? He's never been a favorite of the billion-dollar donor class. He's had a few here and there, but they're not really wedded to him. And so what that's meant is that he has, over the years, gotten a lot more donor support through email fundraising, text fundraising, Facebook fundraising, et cetera.
How does he get away with, essentially, people think they're contributing to his political campaign, and he can divert it any which way he wants to pay Melania for consulting fees or divert it to a legal defense fund? I guess that's probably all in the small print on the website, isn't it?
Well, that's what I was about to say, which is that if you got to read the small print, and if you do read the small print, you'll see that there is a breakdown in terms of how the money that you donate is distributed. And 10% of every donation that you give to Donald Trump's campaign, 10% of it goes to his political action committee, which is called Save America. That political action committee, Save America, is responsible for paying for Donald Trump's legal fees. So one way to think about it is if you were to donate, one of your listeners were to donate $1, 10 cents of that is going to pay potentially for his legal fees.
Does the RNC get a piece of any of this? Not likely.
No, and that wouldn't happen unless Trump wins the Republican presidential nomination, in which case he would form a joint fundraising agreement with the Republican National Committee.
As you were watching the debate last week, what are your thoughts regarding the winners and losers?
You know, it's been interesting to watch because if you look at the polling, there has been some polling that suggests that Trump may have taken a slight hit by not attending that debate, and that you've seen a rise for people like Nikki Haley or Vivek Ramaswamy. However, there's been other polling that came out today, some national polling, also some state polling, that shows Trump maintaining a very large lead, both nationally and in other states. And so, look, the issue here is that this race, other than Trump being out in front, is a muddle. And candidates are going to have to try to use these debates as a means to get attention for themselves. And so, Nikki Haley, through a lot of conventional wisdom, seems to have gotten a lot of credit for having a good debate. Mike Pence maybe as well. But it's so far, none of these candidates are really gaining a tremendous amount of traction in terms of, at least through polls, being a threat to Donald Trump.
Any surprise the Miami mayor dropped out today?
No, because Mayor Suarez failed to get on the stage for the first debate, meaning he would be unlikely to get on the stage for the subsequent debates. And if you're not getting on the stage for debate, if you're failing to get on the stage for debate, it's really hard to get enough attention and to get enough traction for yourself.
Have you ever seen a politician, blue or red, Alex Isenstadt, in your days that is able to parlay they're coming after me because I'm doing this on your behalf? In other words, we're all in this together. We're all victims. Have you ever seen anybody be able to make as much of that angle than Donald Trump, who just seems to be a master at that?
No, and what's going on here is that Trump has forged a profound emotional connection with his base of supporters over the last 7 years, right? It's unmatched. And not only are they donating to him, but they're supporting him in a lot of it throughout this primary, right? That is a very hard thing for other candidates to run against, because one of the things people like to say about Trump is he sort of leads a movement, right? He leads a movement of people who feel like they have been left behind and they have been forgotten about by the elites in Washington, D.C. And so Trump cast himself as one of them, and as a result, he's been able to forge a really strong emotional bond with those people.
I was going back and forth with my audience maybe a week or 10 days ago, playing a cut from Huey Long and then a cut from Donald Trump. They echo each other.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting in terms of how Trump has been able to sort of forge this relationship with his base of supporters. And what you have to think about is just how hard it is for these other candidates to gain traction against him, because none of them really have that kind of long-standing connection to a base of supporters the way he does.
Why hasn't Biden stepped aside and let a younger candidate on the blue side of the world take a shot at Donald Trump, his or her?
Well, look, I mean, Joe Biden, by all accounts, believes he's the party's best chance to defeat Donald Trump because he's done it before, right? He probably thinks that a lot of these other candidates, people who could step up, are more untested. So, look, clearly Democrats are taking a bit of a gamble with Joe Biden, given his age. But for now, you can bet that the president sees himself as the best option.
Alex Isenstadt, it's great touching base with you. It's been a while. We'll have you back regularly, I hope, and we'll read more at Politico.com. Thanks so much for your time.
Anytime. Thank you.
Take care. That's Alex Isenstadt, Politico.com, one of the best in the business.
This is Donald Trump, hopefully your favorite president of all time, better than Lincoln, better than Washington, with an important announcement to make. I'm doing my first official Donald J. Trump NFT collection right here and right now. They're called Trump Digital Trading Cards.
John Howell, Essential Cuts. Check back every weekday for another episode of John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.